Welcome to the SouthPoint YZ250F HOTCAM Installation Guide, Step 1. Begin by removing the seat and the fuel tank. Make sure the fuel petcock is in the off position before removing the fuel hose from the carburetor, and be prepared to catch any overflow gasoline that may still be in the fuel line. Remove both of the hose clamps from the valve cover using your hands or a pair of pliers. There are two hoses that connect to the valve cover. With the hose clamps removed, you can then remove the hoses from the valve cover using a screwdriver and your hands. You may need to gently pry on the hoses to break them free. Now, remove the two valve cover bolts with an Allen wrench or socket. Once the bolts are removed, gently lift the valve cover off the engine with your hands. The next step is to remove the flywheel bolt cover and the flywheel timing inspection hole cover with a large flat blade screwdriver. Be careful not to damage the head of the plastic covers with the screwdriver. Using a 17mm socket, rotate the crankshaft until the top dead center, or TDC, alignment mark appears in the inspection window on the flywheel cover. This removes pressure on the lifters and the cam chain. Check that the cam lobes are not pushing against either the intake or the exhaust cam lifters. They should be pointing in a sideways orientation. If not, rotate the crankshaft again, 360 degrees, until it is lined up on the TDC mark. The engine is now at the TDC mark on the compression stroke. Loosen the cam chain tensioner bolts, alternating from side to side a little on each bolt until the tensioner is completely free. Then, carefully remove the cam chain tensioner assembly from the cylinder. Using a cross-hatch incremental pattern, remove the intake cam cover bolts. With the cam cover bolts removed, gently break the cam cover loose with a screwdriver or your hands. Don't forget to remove the cam bearing clip. Carefully remove the intake cam from the engine and allow the timing chain to hang from the exhaust cam. Now, remove the exhaust cam cover bolts using a cross-hatch incremental pattern. With the cover bolts removed, hang the timing chain from the frame with a piece of wire or string. Be careful not to let the timing chain fall into the engine. Loosen and remove the exhaust cam cover, prying gently if necessary to break it loose from the head assembly. Remove both the cam cover and the bearing retaining clip, then carefully remove the exhaust cam while allowing the timing chain to hang from the frame. Now you are ready to remove the cam lifters using a magnet or other suitable tool. Be careful not to scratch or damage the lifters on removal. Frequently, the shims will stick to the underside of the lifters, so be careful not to drop a shim into the engine. Shims that are stuck can be easily extracted with a magnet. With the shim in hand, measure the thickness using a good quality caliper or micrometer, and then record the measurements for later use. You must repeat this measurement for each shim and lifter combination. The YZ250F has 5 lifters and 5 shims, 3 for the intake cam and 2 for the exhaust. Replace each lifter into the head using a generous amount of assembly lube. Clean the top of the lifters and apply a generous amount of assembly lube to the top of each lifter and also to the cam carrier supports where the cam makes contact with the head. You must lubricate this contact area to avoid engine damage at startup. Apply assembly lube to the cam journals where they make contact with the head assembly. Lubricate the end of the exhaust cam in and around the decompressor assembly. Now, install the exhaust cam with your hands. Keep the cam alignment marks at the 9 and 12 o'clock positions as you work the cam onto the chain. Try not to pull on the cam chain while installing the exhaust cam. If necessary, You can lift the exhaust cam up slightly and rotate it one tooth at a time until the alignment marks are at the 9 and 12 o'clock positions. When the exhaust cam is in place, verify again that the crankshaft is still in alignment and the TDC mark is still centered in the inspection window on the flywheel cover. In a similar fashion, now install the intake cam. There are 3 timing marks on the intake cam at the 9, 12, and 3 o'clock positions. Carefully work the timing chain onto the cam without pulling on the chain. Make certain that the chain is fully installed onto both cams and that the cams are seated properly in the engine head on the carriers. Again, verify that the intake cam alignment marks are at the 9, 12, and 3 o'clock positions, and also that the exhaust cam and crankshaft remain in alignment. Before installing the cam covers, apply additional assembly lube to the cam covers and the top of both cams where they make contact. Do not forget to install the cam bearing retainer clips before installing the cam covers. It may require a bit of downforce to allow the cam covers to seat properly. Now, repeat the process for the intake cam. Reinstall the cam cover bolts in a cross-hatch incremental pattern as before. Tighten down the cam cover bolts using a good quality torque wrench to 7.2 foot-pounds, again using a cross-hatch pattern. Finally, you will need to measure each of the valve clearances for all 5 valves. Measuring and adjusting the valve clearance, or lash, will be covered in Step 2 of this SouthPoint installation guide. Welcome to Step 2 of the SouthPoint YZ250F HOTCAM installation guide. In this video, we'll perform the valve clearance inspection and adjustment procedure. It is very important that you check the valve clearance, or lash, after installing your new HOTCAM. It is the customer's responsibility to ensure that the cam has been properly installed. Failure to perform this inspection and adjustment can result in serious engine damage. Before beginning this step, you should have first completed the HOTCAM installation procedure, Step 1, and it's a good idea to have all the required tools ready in advance. The bike should still have the spark plug lead, valve cover, flywheel inspection cover, and cam chain tensioner assembly removed. In order to complete this procedure, you will also need something to write on. Let's start by going over the required special tools and supplies. You will need a good quality caliper or micrometer. The use of these tools is beyond the scope of this installation guide, but you will need to know how to use them to measure the shims. You will also need a good quality set of angled thickness or feeler gauges. The range of these feeler gauges must be from 1/1000th through 20/1000th of an inch. There are many good pre-bent gauge packages available commercially. We use the Motion Pro set in this procedure. If you don't have a set of pre-bent gauges, you can try bending some of your existing gauges to fit. Although it is always preferable to use gauges that are specifically designed for measuring valve clearances. Since you won't know until you have measured the clearances exactly which shims you will need, you can either wait to purchase the correct shims, or you can order the convenient HOTCAMS shim kit available for your bike. The HOTCAMS shim kit contains several of each size shim available for your engine. With the HOTCAM shim set, you can avoid repeated trips to the dealer, since you will always have the correct part on hand. And since your bike will require periodic adjustment as it wears, this is a good long-term investment and a great way to save money. Now for some additional background information on the YZ250F valve train. This model has a lifter and shim configuration with 5 shims and 5 lifters, one set for each valve. Each lifter has a shim beneath it that rides on top of the valve spring retainer. The intake cam has 3 lobes that push downward on the lifter-shim combination as the cam rotates. The exhaust cam has 2 lobes which work in the same way. This results in a total of 5 valve lifter shim sets that will require inspection and possible adjustment. Beginning with the intake valves, first identify the locations where the thickness gauges must be inserted. There are 3 places that you will insert the gauges on the intake side. It is very helpful to draw a diagram with circles in it to represent the 5 valves. As you take the measurements, write them down next to the circle that corresponds to that valve. Working from the right side of the bike, measure each of the 3 intake clearances, starting with a gauge that is 0.15 millimeters thick. Always be as accurate as possible when measuring, and repeat as many times as necessary to get the most accurate reading. When you've got the final measurement, write it down and proceed to the next valve until you have measured all 3 intake valve clearances. Now, compare the measured valve clearance to the clearance that is specified for your engine. For the YZ250F, the specified intake clearance is 0.15 millimeters or 0.006 inches. If you measured, for example, 0.12 millimeters, the clearance is a little low, and you will need to decrease the size of the shim in order to increase the clearance. Here is the formula for calculating the new shim size. You can see from this example that you would need a shim that is 0.03 millimeters smaller than the shim you are currently using. This is where the measurements from the earlier procedure come into play. When you installed the HOTCAM, you measured the thickness of the existing shims. You will need that number to calculate the new shim size. By our example, you would need to use a shim that is 0.03 millimeters smaller to arrive at the specified clearance. This is just an example, so use your actual measurements that you wrote down to calculate the proper clearance. Repeat this calculation for each of the 3 intake valves. Then, do the 2 exhaust valves in the same way. For the exhaust valves on the YZ250F, the valve clearance should be 0.20 millimeters. The exact same formula applies to the exhaust valve clearance. It is possible that all 5 clearances are within spec after installing the new HOTCAM. Once you have determined which shims require replacement, purchase and install each of the new shims. Remove the intake or exhaust cam assembly as required using the same procedure outlined in Step 1. If only the intake shims require replacement, there is no need to remove the exhaust cam, and vice versa. To save time, only remove the cams which require shim replacement. Use the exact same procedure as before, making sure the crankshaft alignment is still in the correct position. Once you have the new shims installed, re-measure the new clearances to make certain that the new shims have resulted in the desired clearance for all 5 valves. If not, repeat the shim calculation and replacement process until all 5 valves have the correct clearance. When all of the valves are within specified clearance, you are ready to reinstall the cam chain tensioner, the valve cover, and all of the other parts you removed in Step 1. Use a long, flat screwdriver to fully retract the cam chain tensioner before inserting it into the engine. Turn the screwdriver clockwise until it stops. Then, hold the screwdriver in place while inserting the tensioner assembly into the cylinder. Refer to the Step 1 video for the reverse order of installation to complete the assembly sequence. As a final note, when you have reassembled the engine and are ready to operate, it is extremely important to follow the recommended break-in procedure. This procedure is outlined in the SouthPoint installation software and also in the materials that accompany your HOTCAM. Run the engine for 20 to 30 minutes at about 3,000 RPM with a light load. Try not to let the bike idle for extended periods while breaking in the HOTCAM. It is also important to change the oil after the break-in procedure is complete. Be sure to read and follow any additional instructions that came with your HOTCAM. More detailed information about your YZ250F and a complete virtual service manual can be purchased from SouthPoint at www.southpointmanuals.com. This concludes the SouthPoint YZ250F HOTCAM installation guide. We hope you will enjoy many hours of improved engine performance with your new HOTCAM.